Thank you very much. I am very honored by having a possibility to lecture in this distinguished place. My contacts with Oxford started when I worked in legal philosophy, and I wrote the first doctoral dissertation about legal philosophy of Harold L.A. Hart. And I guess that it was the first PhD about him. Then I met him several years later, and I learned that his roots were in Poland, his maternal roots. So I remember this meeting with Hart very well, and it was one of the greatest events in my academic life to see this famous legal philosopher. But of course, I switched from legal philosophy to theoretical philosophy, and also I had several good friends. Some of them are here in this room, so it is my additional pleasure that I can speak in this place and to this audience. So topic is how to define logic, and this is an outline of my talk. First I will speak about historical understanding of logic, then about some contrasts and proposals how to understand logic. Then I claim that so-called universality property is the main feature of any understanding, of logic in any understanding, and from this I will try to outline a metalogical definition of logic, and of course it is a philosophical topic, so it must generate some problems, difficulties, questions, because we are philosophers, and philosophy without controversies would be very boring, of course. Particular problems are related to so-called first-order logic and the distinction between classical and non-classical logic. My talk will be delivered from the point of view of classical logic because it is the best outline kind of logic with very clear and precise defined methodological properties, contrary to other kinds of logic which raise some more or less important doubts. No, I came from Poland. Probably you know that this country was very important in the history of logic, particularly in the interwar period. There was a great Warsaw School of Logic with Łukasiewicz, Leśniewski, and particularly Alfred Tarski, and I will, so to speak, follow some style of thinking about logic proposed by Polish logicians. So let's some historical understandings of logic from antiquity to our times, maybe to the end of 19th century. So first, I don't claim that it was historically first, or I don't claim that my list is complete, of course, but it covers the main approaches to logic. First was dialectic by Plato as analysis and synthesis of concepts. Of course, we can find in Plato some inference rules and so on, also earlier in Pythagoras school. However, it was rather very occasional, casual problems. Then we have the first understanding of logic as which can be called formal logic. It was analytic, as called by Aristotle. Was theory of deduction, syllogistic. It was the first formal logical theory in the history of human thought. But Aristotle also was speaking about logic as organon, a device, a methods of reasoning, not only deductive or logical, but also empirical, even rhetorical, and so on. Then with maybe less known idea of Epicurus as canonic norms of knowledge. Also medicina mentis, descriptive and normative account of mental capacities, like in the case of Cicero. Then we go to modern time and Vernunftslehre, rules of pure reason, the tradition of Philosophia Rationalis, and also Kant. In 20th century, Husserl proposed understanding of logic as Kunstlehre, the art of arguing. Earlier Bolzano, earlier Fichte, Wissenschaftslehre, theory of science. And still one understanding by two Cartesian thinkers, Arnaud and Nicole, Denglere, the theory of thinking. So there's a lot of, you see, traditions, understanding, which which requires some further elaborations. Yes. What is logic in this variety of proposals? So some contrast, additional explanations which cover logica docens, theoretical logic, logica utens, applied logic. Some logicians and philosophers say that logic is important not as a theory, but rather as something practical, which says us how to reason, how to argue, how to achieve some new results. Leibniz is famous for his so-called logica magna. Logica magna is a category which is sometimes used in order to be addressed to such constructions like the idea of logicism, Frege and Russell, that something which covers at least mathematics and possibly the rest of knowledge. But it was anticipated by Leibniz when he was speaking about calculus rationicator, or characteristica universalis, a universal language in order to express everything. And then philosophers should not quarrel, but calculemus, say calculemus, let us calculate and solve all problems in such a powerful symbolic language. Now, some definitions of mathematical logic offered by famous logicians, even so to speak, fathers of mathematical logic. Bertrand Russell: symbolic or formal logic is the study of various general types of deduction. Frege: logic is concerned only with those grounds of judgment which are truths. To make a judgment because we are cognizant of other truths as providing a justification, it is known as inferring. There are laws governing this kind of justification, and to set up these laws of valid inference is the goal of logic. Please note that for Frege, deduction is okay, correct, good, as if it starts from true premises. It is, of course, not quite coherent with idea of logical or correct inference, because truth of premises is not relevant. Alonzo Church, in his famous book, formal logic is concerned with the analysis of sentences or of propositions, and of proofs with attention to the form of abstractions from the matter. Now we have a very important distinction between form and matter of reasoning, form and content, as other logicians say, and logic is related only to form, but not to content. Then we have Elliot Mendelssohn, also very famous textbook of logic. Logic is the analysis of methods of reasoning. Logic is interested in the form rather than the content of argument. Now, he repeats to some extent Church's definition. Schoenfield, also famous textbook. Logic is the study of reasoning. But we can ask, every reasoning, or only some kinds of reasoning? Symbolic logic, Anderton. Symbolic logic is a mathematical model of deductive thought. So the task is restricted only to deduction. And Witold Pogorzelski, a contemporary Polish logician, logic is a theory of logical consequence. Oh, sorry. Now, if we look at monographs, papers, textbooks, and so on, we have several contrasts which are considered as important in order to understand logic. Also some proposals of new logics and so on. Some of them classical, non-classical. Classical is, let's say, binary to valued logic, but not covering, for example, modal logic. Non-classical is many-valued, intuitionistic. Further, we have an important contrast: first-order logic, higher-order logic. Some proposals: model theoretic logic. There is a famous book, a collection of papers edited by Pfefferman and Berweiss, Model Theoretic Logic, about 700 pages. Recommend to read. I recommend. Fuzzy Logic, which try to, so to speak, make vagueness regular and a normal concept which is not out of logic, but something normal in logic. Also non-monotonic logic, which omits one of conditions of classical consequence operation. I will speak about this. However, universality property, that logic is in a sense universal, seems to me one of the most fundamental. Logic is general, universal, abstract, contrary to concrete fields like physics, mathematics, history, even philosophy. Now, how to understand the universality property? Petrus Hispanos, a medieval logician, said that dialectica, that is logic, est, of course, ars, not art, artium, et scientia scientiarum ad omnium aliarum scientiarum methodorum principia fiam habent. So what is logic? Ars, it was a medieval term which was practically equivalent to science. Yes, so logic is a science on science which provides methodological principles for any other science. Tarski, in his textbook on mathematical logic and methodology, introduction to logic and methodology on deductive sciences, published in Polish in 1935, then translated into many languages, and this book became a standard textbook of logic in many Western universities. And he says that the word logic is used in the present book as the name of the discipline which analyzes the meaning of the concept common to all sciences and establishes general laws governing this concept. So quite unexpected definition. If we remember, the task was a very, very strong mathematical logician. Earlier, Leibniz, I spoke about this. Logic is characteristica universalis or logica magna. Then we have Gödel. Logic is a science prior to all others, which contains the ideas and principles underlying all science. It is from a paper published in the collection Russell's philosopher Bertrand Russell in 1944, one of Schilb's volume. Quine. The lexicon is what caters distinctly to special tastes and interests. Grammar and logic are the central facility serving all comers. So logic is independent of special knowledge, special interests, special contents. Offers a service to every other. Science and Gilbert Ryle, known in this place, logical principles are perfectly general Anyhow, in this sense, the differences of concrete subject matters make no difference to the validity or fallaciousness of inferences. Logical constants are indifferent to subject matter and are topic neutral. So as you know, Rye was not very friendly to mathematical or formal logic. However, this quotation, it is from 1954, I think the first, maybe metaphorical, expression of the idea that logic must be topically neutral. This idea is presently very, very strongly stressed. Other the principles and content cannot depend on non-logical ones. The substantial content is coded. No substantial content is coded in it. Then the longer, the same was contemporary younger logician. Well, the same was stressed by Frege, one of the fathers of mathematical logic. Perhaps I will not read this. Russell area logic is concerned with the real world as truly as zoology, so with its more abstract and general features. It is quite, so to speak, maybe not confusing, but anyway claiming quotation, which shows that Russell didn't consider logic as the set of tautologies. Logic is about the world, like zoology or any other special science, but rather with its more general features. And the last quotation is logic, once again, Berwise from this book, Model Theoretic Logic. Logic consists of a collection of mathematical structures, a collection of formal expressions, and a relation of satisfaction between the two. We can say then that the logic is something we construct to study the logic of some parts of mathematics. So, Berwise restricted this concept of model theoretic logic only to mathematics, and he said that the task of logic is to define an abstract structure, a language concerning this structure, and to investigate satisfaction relation, which is the basic tool, as we know, to define the concept of truth, model theoretic truth. So we can the following understandings of universality of logic, universality property. First, logic is universal because it is universally applicable. So it goes back to Petrus Hispans. Second, logic is universal because it is topic neutral. It is idea of Gilbert Ryle. Logic is universal certainly because its principles are universally valid. Logic is universal because it provides powerful expressive language, so you can cover by logic maximal content, so to speak. In this sense, it's universal. It is like Berwise stresses this point. Of course, it's related to logica magna. characteristica universalis, or calcusus rationinator. No, but we can a problem. Why? What is universal? Principles of deduction, principle of truth, concepts, methods of definition, methods of classification, and probably there are many others possibilities. This is a question, the following, and I will try to address to the following problem. Which understandings of universality are equivalent, are strictly equivalent, not only rhetorically equivalent, and in the sense of metalogical, we can simply show that university property is related to some essential metalogical constructions or theorems. So to speak, not all of these understandings are equivalent with other. For example, this understanding proposed by Ken Berwise, that logic should provide powerful languages in order to express so much content as possible, is not equivalent to other properties and cannot be. It is very, very easy to show by metalogic. Now, metalogical definition of logic. I follow works of Tarski, published in this 100 years, no, almost 100 years ago, because it was at the beginning of the 30s of the last century. His papers about fundamental concepts of metamathematics, published originally in German, but then translated in 1956 in his famous collection, Logic, Semantics, Metamathematics, published by the way by Oxford or Clarendon Press at that time. I don't know why this very nice name is replaced by Oxford University Press. Of course, I will a little bit beyond Tarski. First point, we have two distinct, conceptually distinct account of logic. First is that we have a language and satisfaction relation. It is a semantic conception. And second is language and probability operation or relation, which is syntactic. And it's a problem how to compare both. It's a natural question. Now you can see there is an attempt to show that the idea is that both the formal I will try to formally expose this various understanding of logic or universality property. So we define that A is a consequence of the set of sentences X, even only if A is provable from the set X. And now, according to Tarski, he formulated axioms only for first 9 axioms, but it is very easy to supplement. So the axioms for consequence operation. classical, or I will say classical consequence operation, and this set of axioms can be divided into into some groups until first four axioms are so-called general axioms. The language we consider only is the numerable, finite of the power of aleph 0. Then we have that X is always contained in the set of its consequences. Then we have what is called and controversial now monotonicity, and then we have a kind of triviality. If you take consequences of X and try to close once again by consequence, nothing new happens. There are still one general axiom. It is that we consider only so-called finite consequence operation. Then we have deduction theorem, modus ponens, characterization of negation by CA and C9, and C10 until C10 until C13. We have axioms for first order logic, which was not formulated by Tarski. He was interested only in propositional consequence operation, and so until C5 we have no logic, because there is no logical constants. Then we have pure implicational calculus, defined by modus ponens and deduction theorem, and then we have the rest, full propositional logic, negation and implication, as we know, are sufficient to define all other operators. It is a well-defined logical theory, trivial or not, this is another question. However, everything is clear. How to define logic? Can you help me? Because I don't know what's... Oh, sorry, this is something.
Okay. Yes, okay.
Next. Oh, okay. And we have quite surprising definition. A belongs to logic, even only if A is the set of A is a consequence of the empty set. Alternatively or equivalently, logic is the set of consequences of the empty set. Something like creatio ex nihilo. We have an empty set, not of course, because the concept of logical consequence is not empty or has a very rich content. Tarski was sometimes inclined to think that this is a logical trick. Maybe. However, this definition is equivalent to three other, which are certainly not trivial. A belongs to logic if and only if its negation is contradictory or inconsistent. We expect this property, that logic should have this property. And it is useful and used in mathematical proofs. Next. Logic is the only non-empty product of all deductive systems of theories. deductive system or a theory is a set of sentences which is equal to its consequences. Yes, so please note that this one of claims concerning universality is that logic is a part of all sciences. Of course, not every science is a deductive theory. However, many can be presented in this way. And you have. Logic belongs to every science. It's even more, it is the only set which has this property. If you define science as a deductive system or a deductive theory. Then next, A belongs to logic even only if for every model M, A is true in M. This is a very traditional definition. That logic is universally true or valid. Very beautiful definition. And finally, A belongs to Cn0, even only if for every model M, A is true in M should be, not, of course, not L. Why it is interesting? Because we have correspondence between a traditional account of logic. Logic doesn't require any particular assumption. So what does it mean? That the special assumption of logic, the set of special assumption of logic is empty, and it is exactly defined by this consequence of this definition. Finally, we have that logic as understood as language plus satisfaction of relation is equivalent to logic, equal to logic as understood as language with probability operation. Now we can propose that this definition of logic, logica utens, how we use logic? We use logic as the system of rules of inference. Logica docens is something which is a theory which is true in all models. We have a generalization of this idea. So if there is a controversy between so-called inferentialism, logic is a set of inference rule, and sententially, so to speak, logic is a set of theorems, I mean sentences. So this controversy is simply not important, because every fact about rules of inference can be translated into translated this language concerning sentences. Now, formal displays of or formal aspects of universality property. We have, of course, completeness theorem, because everything belongs to the equivalence of logica utens and logica dotens is simply generated by with equality by computation. Then we have a famous and very controversial Lindström theorem that first order logic is the only logic which is compact and obeys Levenheim-Skolem theorem, namely that every first order theory, if has it is a downward theorem, if a model of arbitrary infinite cardinality, it has also model which universe is denumerable, infinitely denumerable. And this theorem is considered, Lindström theorem, as a serious restriction and even something which is a fault of first order logic. Maybe it's completely different, that this theorem expresses in other aspect of universality property, because first order logic wouldn't be universal if it were distinguish a special model, some model as a to some extent characteristic or something like that. So we have a choice, either universality property, either content. Polish logician, contemporary Polish logician Andrzej Grzegorczyk, you can consult his very, very good textbook available in English, Outline of Mathematical Logic. He ultimately, because it was anticipated by Tarski and Lindenbaum, formulated so-called theorem about not distinguishing extra-logical contents by logic, of course, first-order logic. This is another interesting meta-mathematical or meta-logical expression of universality property. So no particular content is distinguished by logic, but we will say that there is a question whether it is a good property or not. Okay, so however, and fortunately or not, I have no idea whether it is a good thing or not. We have degrees of logicality even in the first order logic. So we have propositional logic, which is semantically complete, post-complete, and decidable. Very good properties, nice properties. First order logic, semantically complete, not post-complete, undecidable. Something for something. I used to say very frequently that in logic, like in life, nothing is without price. So you must pay for some property by lacking another property. For example, semantic complete is okay. However, because first order logic allows us to formulate more contents than propositional logic, there is a price, which is undecidability in not post-completeness. What is even more surprising, that if we add identity, which is in most textbooks almost automatic, so we have first order logic with identity and nothing more, not, because identity allows us to define so-called numerical quantifiers. There are, for example, 10 objects in this, no, not in this place. We can define such, which are obviously extra-logical. And now the question, which logic represents logical or metalogical universality in the strongest sense? Let's say that first order logic is still a good candidate, even if we add identity, which is something between logical and extra-logical. However, we have doubts about first-order logic, expressed by Hao Wang, for example, a Chinese logician working in US. He pointed out that Levenheim-Skolem theorem is a problem because it limits, restricts the power, expressive power of first-order logic. For example, we cannot define in first-order arithmetic the concept of being finite. For Hao Wang is something wrong. Still, other similar doubts. There's a very, very long quotation from Berweiss, who says that we, as logicians, we do our subject a disservice by convincing others that logic is first-order logic. Why? Because according to Berweiss, logic must cover so much expressive power as possible. No, and the problem of relation, it is probably the most hot problem in the philosophy of logic, how to relate classical logic to not classical logic. It is not quite clear what is non-classical logic, at least for me. I was trained in Poland, so I should know. Yes, that Łukasiewicz logic, many valued logic is certainly non-classical. But okay, please note the following facts. I will not derive conclusions at the moment in this talk. If we compare, for example, intuitionistic logic and classical logic, so one could say that there are completely different systems of logic. Gödel translations tried to compare. If ordered to get classical logic from intuitionistic logic, you need to use so-called double translation. But it is a question whether this double translation covers content of laws of non-classical logic. But the problem is this, at least in my opinion. We can look at intuitionistic logic from 2 points of view. One, we say like Brouwer and Hating. There are two completely different and contradictory, mutually contradictory systems. But other is that intuitionistic logic is a subsystem of classical logic, because with the Ban law, the law of excluded meat, we obtain non-classical, classical, intuitionistic logic from classical. Now, if we look from classical perspective, intuitionistic logic is a subsystem of classical logic. If you look from intuitionistic point of view, the situation is different. Is something more to say? Yes, because we should ask whether some metalogical theorems about intuitionistic logic question are provable intuitionistically or not. And the most specialists say that intuitionistic proof of completeness of first order logic, intuitionistic first order logic is impossible. And this is a reason for priority of classical reasoning. Now finally arguments for bivalence, metalogic. I said about the role of classical logic, simplicity, and the last slide. We have several oppositions. I will not say that similar to bivalence. However, it's something interesting that in our life, in science, in other experiences, this two-valueness appears very frequently. In some cases, of course, truth, facts, falsehood, the lack of facts. By the way, it is for another talk. We can develop a perfect system of classical logic based on the concept of rejection and falsity or falsehood as a distinguished value. Łukasiewicz tried to do something like that, but not completely. But now it is, there's no problem. The formal, so-called dual consequence operation, it was elaborated by some Polish logicians, is a dual counterpart of classical consequence operations, and we can generate classical logic in this very, very strange sense, sometimes maybe not quite strange. For example, you reject disjunction if you reject both its constituents. So now, why humankind selected this logic based on consequence operation which I outlined, but not by rejection consequence operation? Maybe that it is something in our organization. We have various opposition binary, of course, spatial, temporal, biological opposition, passive, active. Neutrality is very rare in this. Possession and its lack, inner, outer, modal contrast, necessary, contingent. Biological rhymes are binary, perceptual contrasts, maybe they are fuzzy, not only binary. Binary structure of the helix and genetic codes is established fact. 0-1 nature of information. Truth protects information, falsehood results in its dispersion. And ordinary quantifiers are dual. So if this list justifies to some extent at least bivalence, it offers a justification why classical logic based on relation of bivalence is distinguished. However, one can say, well, but why don't say that also some extensions of classical logic satisfy this? I give only one contrast, his last remark. Take Kripke's semantics. This is a very beautiful construction for modalities. But look, only case system doesn't require any additional constrained on accessibility relation. All other systems introduced to this relation, which looks as purely logical, additional concepts. Some systems require transitivity, other reflexivity. Deontic logic cannot be reflected, this relation cannot be reflexive. Now this is a logic. So I think that modal logic is something which is a formal theory. However, it is difficult to qualify it as a logic, except K-system, which simply is. Modalities are treated as similarly as quantifiers. This is an empirical example that this universality property is important. However, once again, in one sense it is a very weak property, because universality is logic, is a system is universal, its content is minimal. Okay, thank you very much.
I will moderate the discussion in the usual way, so hand for a question and a finger for a follow-up. And because we do have, I think, a more diverse group of participants than usual, if you could just state your name and if you want affiliation before your question, that would be great. And as usual, the first 3 questions, if there are any, go to the graduate students. I open up the discussion to non-graduate students and to everybody else that wants to ask the question. Professor Williamson.
Yeah, so actually just on the last thing that you were saying about modal logic, you know, if you do the semantics in a way which doesn't have an accessibility relation at all, then the logic that you get is S5. So you could also make a case that S5 has this kind of distinguished property, because if you just simplify the models, then you don't need to impose any special constraints on the accessibility relation, but you still get a strong modal logic that do things that way.
No, I am not sure, because I remember discussions in Krakow and in the Department of Logic. Which modal logic is minimal?
But it's not
okay,
really
and which is maximal? Of course, S5 is the most powerful logic.
Well, no, it isn't actually, but there are stronger ones.
Anyway,
but
however, still I cannot find at the moment an example, but I guess that it must be it is simply some theorems of modal logic are not expressible in classical propositional first order logic. I even neglect the problem of this famous Quine's problem of predicate modal logic. Let's ignore this. Yes, so the problem how to read quantifiers or predicates or some formulas, the dicta there. So look that this problem are not occur in classical logic. I mean, in first order logic itself. You cannot have a problem. Every Dere reading is equivalent to the dicta reading, which is, I guess, not quite clear, at least even in SPI. So, not only accessibility relation is something which is problematic in this system. For me, for example, I mean, that's my private view. Logical rules of modalities are those rules which are coded by logical square for modalities. I mean, if you take unary operators, then of course you must add something, distributivity, I mean k plus logical square, eventually generalized for complexes of modal operators. I see nothing wrong. It is not a problem of blaming modal logic that it is not a logic in such a sense as first order logic. It is only a problem of showing that is a conceptual analysis, very important, however, which is not universal, because you have other rules for other possibilities to read modalities, which are legitimate. But in first order logic, you have the only one reading of quantifiers. Even if you add generalized quantifiers, it is most powerful logic, which via Lindström theorem doesn't satisfy some basics. This is my view.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how clear the notion of universality is. I mean, if you were really worried about universality, you could worry that that in first order logic you're not allowed to have models with the empty domain.
Yes.
That seems like a restriction on some kind. I mean, as I say, I'm not sure that it's a well-defined notion about it, but it seems like some kind of restriction that you could worry about in first order logic.
Yes, I forgot this exam. Sorry, I planned to. Yes. This is a kind of empirical assumption about logic. Empirical or not. Anyway, I am not sure whether this fact that empty. I of course I neglect free logic. Doesn't matter because it's another story. However, I am not sure whether it is important for metallurgical properties.
Well,
But this is a question of if this is right. I would say that this argument shows that logic is not quite independent of real world.
So on that final, sorry, Edwin was in Masters in Maths and Computers. On the final slide there you had some examples of...
Can you speak louder,
yeah,
okay?
On the final slide you had some examples of bivalence kind of showing up in the real world. And the idea seems to be this justifies the use of like bivalence in logic. And I'm wondering whether this conflicts with the universal property, which is saying that logic is kind of about everything. I'm not sure how these examples kind of eliminate the possibility that there is some conceivable, free value system somewhere out there.
Phew. I mean this. Okay, so in our teaching tradition, as if we teach logic in Poland, we distinguish so-called, in Latin it is logica sensu stricto, and logica sensu largo. Logica sensu largo covers semantics, but understood as a theory of meaning, formal logic, mathematical logic, and methodology of science. This is a legitimate tradition because logic was taught in this way always. However, it is not homogenic subject. It is a tradition that in order to think logically or obey logical laws, you must use the language clearly, define concepts or names, and to make, for example, logical divisions in a correct way, and what was always much more important, to operate by non-deductive rules in a rational way. What does it mean? That a set of empirical evidence confirms your general hypothesis. An induction problem. Logic in narrow sense, this is a mathematical logic in which I tried to define in this paper. However, it is still something more. Maybe that I should say earlier about that. What is transcendental logic in sense of Kant? What is interesting that Kant didn't use the term deduction in our sense. It is in first pages of Critique of Pure Reason. Because I am a lawyer from my first education, or first I studied law and philosophy at the same time, almost 1 year of difference. So but I can read texts which allude to legal philosophy. Even I read Kant's translation into Polish, made by my professor, a famous student of Husserl, Roman Ingarden. So I immediately realized what Ingarden didn't observe, because he made comments to his translation, that Kant clearly alluded to medieval use of deductio in legal contexts. And for him, deduction was deduction in German. He didn't use deduction in logical sense. For him, logical derivation was Ableitung, still in his Logik, published posthumously or at the last. So anyway, he alluded to medieval use of deduction in which a party before court stated his or her, no, at that time his claim, and the deduction of this claim consists of two parts: saying something about facts and subsuming facts into a general legal rule. What Kant did is simply interpreted these general rules are transcendental norms, even not principles. So it is another interesting fact. However, when mathematical logic arose, which is, appreciated by philosophers in a very in different ways, also by mathematicians. Some mathematicians are fans of mathematical logic. Others say that Poincaré, for example, a great mathematician, great philosopher, great physicist, said that logic, I quote from, it was not his words, but logic lost its sterility, it born paradoxes. It was, of course, anti-Russellian view. So there are, a lot of problems, and we must propose something which is called a regulative analysis, even not definition. We must decide, what do you like to do? If you like to do transcendental logic, so mathematical logic cannot help you. In the case of this logic sensu largo, there is a problem. Popper said that induction is pernicious, is something which is non-rational, but Carnap was, all the time. Tarski had a very interesting anecdote, a very interesting answer to this question. Someone asked him, Professor Tarski, what do you think about controversy between Popper and Carnap? Who is right? Tarski answered, Popper is right, but on the second side, people are more sympathetic. Of course, it was a very, very, nasty, in a sense, remark. So I think there is no hope that philosophers would agree. For example, Roman Ingarden, my teacher in philosophy, I mentioned him. He was against logic, absolutely. For him it was a triviality. Like in the case of Husserl. And say, can you demonstrate this? Okay, I can. In one of his books, he made a footnote, about Gödel. So the Gödel theorems is very important, but we should identify assumption of this result. Was it completely mistaken? It's a mathematical theorem and all assumptions are clearly stated, but of course philosophical interpretation can be different. So philosophers should decide whether he or she stop at mathematical content or formal logical content, or tries to do something philosophical. I am fan of the second approach. However, I must say that everything in this approach can be questioned, can be objected. Even, like Ken Barwise was a great logician, great mathematical logician. So he had to have some reasons in order, he said, that higher order logic is necessary because it covers mathematical contents which are not available in first order logic. It is a reason. However, when I visited Stanford several years ago, he was still alive. Okay, but we have a problem. What what we should choose? Power, powerful content, or universality, because you cannot combine these two features. Cannot you? Of course, I understand that for you, as a mathematician, content is much more important. But for me, as a philosopher, I am looking for some universal features of human thinking. Logic is a very good candidate to this task. I don't know whether I satisfied your question.
Sorry.
I feel as a film star.
That.
Daniel Isaacson, philosophy. This is just for clarification, and maybe it's just too obvious even to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. That I take it that this talk that you've given should be seen as descriptive rather than prescriptive. That is to say, you've surveyed a great range of ideas that people have had about logic and uses they've made of it. But am I right in saying that you're not offering a view about what we should take logic to be?
This is a normative question. As we know, norms cannot be derived from purely descriptive statements. So, but okay. Now we have a tradition. My view about philosophy is that we must respect philosophical tradition. Philosophers don't invent things like physicists. On the other hand, certainly it is not true, like Whitehead said, that the entire history of philosophy is a set of footnotes to Plato's dialogues, even translated by Jowett. It is certainly not true. However, we are bounded by tradition. So we have, and now you have several historical understanding of logic. It is much more than I said, of course. Quite recently, just before leaving Poland, I didn't read, but I passed by a book which is called Mathematics and Philosophical Tradition. It is an attempt to extract from various philosophical views mathematical content. It is a little bit speculative, of course. However, interesting. For example 1. There is a problem how to derive out from is. And all answers. Yes, you can do or not, must take into account some metalogical or even mathematical, in a very rough sense, ideas. So clearly, my view is that first order logic is a proper logic. But why? Because it is the only logic which displays universality property in a clear metalogical way. I can define this property by metalogical tools. Someone can, of course, can say, no, Woleński, you are wrong. Okay, so please offer me another definition. I remember my discussions with Ingarden. It was 70, no, not yet, but 60 years ago. I had a similar view like today. He was a Husserl student. Logic must access essences. So I said, why? And how? It is even a more important problem. We say in Poland, panie profesorze, in German, Herr Professor. There's a typical way of addressing to professors in Polish, and in German. So, simple fact. Compare Leibniz and Husserl, or Kant and Husserl, or Fichte and Husserl. All proposed access to essences, but in different ways to choose, without accepting some philosophy, very strong philosophy. Yes, like Leibniz modalology or Kantian. No, Kant is a good example because his system was so wide. But what is the advantage of such analysis as I presented today? It is moderate, certainly not so speculative like, in good sense of course, like the great philosophers, but I am sure and I can show what I am doing. If you have another view about consequence operation, okay, please do. Maybe non-monotonic consequence operation is better, but our controversy is at least clear. And for this reason, I recommend as a philosophical method paraphrasing of formal or logical theorems, metalogical theorems, of course, with a full consciousness that there are some rival approaches. I learned this method from Polish philosophers, particularly Kazimierz Ajdukiewicz, who wrote in 1934 a paper. I am not sure whether it is available in English, on applicability of logic to philosophical problems. And he says the problem analyzed by him was mind-body problem, parallelism, psychophysical parallelism. Okay, so what a person who proposes this view says us, that language of thought is equivalent to language about physical bodies. So every sentence about mental phenomena is translatable into language of physical language. Well, okay, it is a good philosophy. However, there is one problem. First language is intentional, second language is extensional. And if you like to defend this view, at first you must prove that both languages are equivalent. It is not a solution of this problem, because you say, no, I am not saying that I solve this question. I only show an necessary condition for any rational discussion. And another example, which maybe is more interesting for you, in this country, in this philosophy, the problem of realis is one of central. To give you a paper, the two papers, both are available, so I recommend this. One was Epistemology and Semiotics, published after war, in 1948, and second was the problem of transcendental idealism in semantic formulation. Let's say, and he says, why argumentation of Berkeley is dubious. Take esse is equal to percipi. Okay. Idea of esse, and it was in Berkeley clear, was that esse concerns something which belongs to external world. So it is our relation to world. Percipi, relations between thoughts, ideas. In British, let's say, English tradition. I don't know how Berkeley is qualified, his nationality. He was Irish, yes. However, is considered as an English empirist. I don't know whether you agree with me, but the term British empiricist is wrong. Because it was not Britain when these great people began their work. Yes, Locke was English, Berkeley was Irish. No, Hume was on border. Yes, Great Britain. Okay, so and I became okay. So we have Tarski's theorem, roughly speaking, that semantics cannot be defined by syntax. Paraphrase is this: percipi is a syntactic term, esse is a semantic term. So definition, defending idealism by this Berkeleyan equality is wrong. For this reason, okay, maybe it's another reason. So this is my view about how to do philosophy. Of course, we can discuss determinism, indeterminism, causality in Aristotelian or Thomistic terms, why not? However, ignoring quantum mechanics, something, which is not quite complete. The same, I think, is about logic. Metalogic now is so important field. It was inspired by philosophy. In Poland, for example, clearly Tarski, Leśniewski, Łukasiewicz, pioneers of metalogic, were very strongly influenced by philosophy. However, they departed the philosophical content and formal content. And if you like to use both or relate both, this method of paraphrase is I think the best. The same is with last exam. Tarski developed the idea of Aristotle about truth or not? It's a very interesting story. I wrote a book about this. In very in translation, I think that English translation of De Interpretatione, Perihermeneias. If truth is understood as correspondence, it is about future contingents. Wrong translation, because in Greek text there is no word which could be translated as correspondence. So you must be very careful about interpretation of old masters. So, sorry, of course, I don't know what logic should be. However, I try to paraphrase the present status of logical theory. Almost in every textbook, monograph, I read that there is a problem how to interpret first-order logic. How it is related to, for example, set theory. Is Hilbert's thesis that every mathematical theory can be formalized as first-order theory correct or not? Very beautiful questions. Okay.
My name is Pavel. I'm studying maths and computer science. And this may be a bit peculiar question. What do you think are some challenges or goals for philosophers of logics or logicians this century, if there are some?
Maybe because I have problem with hearing listening.
If there are some challenges, goals for logicians nowadays, and what are they?
You mean philosophical challenges, yes, or?
Yes, the philosophical.
So I expect much more from so-called philosophical logicians, which are trained in formal logic, because there is something very, very even depressive and regrettable as concerns the development of mathematical logic after 1945. Maybe that is a reason was caused by political events, Second War, and so on. But of course, I don't mean that logicians were particularly responsible, involved, or not. Something changed. Certainly in Soviet Union, for example. It's a good example. Namely, according to standards, political standards, logic is not a part of philosophy, it's a part of mathematics. These attempts to, ban logic from philosophy was not quite successful. However, many logicians changed even profession, and they became mathematicians. Located in, we are specialists in the foundations of mathematics. But it was not only a political, like in Soviet Union, but in general, mathematical logicians were, logicians, let's say, were treated not quite fairly by mathematicians. I don't know how it was in England, in this country. Certainly in Poland it happened. However, the very strong tradition of logic blocked this process. However, it resulted in the following situation, that at mathematical faculties, where Department of Foundations of Mathematics, and we are not logicians, we are mathematicians. However, departments of logic, formal logic or logic simply, were at philosophical faculties. Probably the situation in Poland was better due to this really respected tradition, what is maybe not known, that when was a problem how to teach students in Poland after, let's say, 48, when this time of Stalinism came. So Polish logicians, who were very, very, prestigious even at that time, convinced authorities that logic should be taught at all university studies, so legal, faculty of law, history, and so on and so on. At first it was a facultative subject, however, 95% of students chose this subject. It was something which was in other countries. The situation was, like I said, there was a very strong attack of mathematicians over logicians. If you visited Berkeley, for example, I was just, maybe not very, but in 89, so there was a stronghold of mathematical logic, yes, due to Tarski, and in building of mathematics, I don't remember its name, maybe, do you remember there was this building, the mathematical...
Evans Hall?
No. Anyway, so it was the entire building, and last floor was students of Tarski, but one floor below, Solovay and other new logicians. And where it was Tarski seminar every month, or even once in 2 weeks. So the whole group of philosophers and logicians, students of Tarski, and also some people from Stanford arrived. I remember because I delivered a talk about history of Polish logic in Poland. So nobody from Solovay's group came, and I asked, no, this is a tradition, because we are completely separated. They are mathematicians, we are logicians in the spirit of Tarski. Now the situation is more balanced, due, for example, to the letter which was, I think, written here in England. As far as I remember, it was about 20 or no, even more, was a protest of logicians in order to mathematical content of Journal of Symbolic Logic. This journal lost philosophical content and even detailed problems of logic, very special. There are 2 new journals, the Bulletin of Symbolic Logic and Archive of Symbolic Logic, yes. But because editors of journal didn't agree to change the profile of. And this conflict started before war. Alonso Church, who was very interested in philosophical problems of logic, was the editor-in-chief of journal just before war. Tarski was the president of Association of Symbolic Logic, and he wrote to Church a letter in which he claimed that I would like to see in journal also papers on philosophical content, of course, if they satisfy some general conditions. So, and returning to your question, it is a sociological problem, but it is important also for how logic is done. Yes. And I think that this community of philosophical logicians, like Professor Williamson, for example, fills this gap which unfortunately arose due to this conflict, which was not only political. By the way, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin was very interested in logic. Yes. And he was a sensation that he ordered a new edition of a textbook which he used in priest seminar. So Soviet logical community was shocked that the book of priest was edited once again. Yes, but he was and second anecdote was a logician, very good, but he studied still before October Revolution, Wojświło. Maybe some people know this name. Someday, it was in the 30s, a car with KGB officers came to him, please go with us. Where? Not your problem, you will informed. No, so they even put maybe some nothing else. Anyway, they drove via Moscow somewhere, approached Lubyanka, this famous KGB prison. However, they missed it. So Wojtyła was shocked. They entered Kremlin. Go with us, after leaving car. Finally, they entered a room in which all ministries, all the Council of Ministry of Soviet Union was collected. Stalin at the time was not the prime minister, so he was absent, but the person who led this group said, Professor Wojtyła, Comrade Stalin ordered us to learn logic. Please start lecture. So, jokes or not, but so I think that the situation in logical community, world logical community, of course, was also related to political issues. For example, philosophers, if wanted to be free of political control, philosophical logicians or philosophers simply change views and became members of mathematical faculties, and I know from many. Andrzej Mostowski, a famous Polish logician, the best student of Tarski, Polish student of Tarski, said to his doctor students, "Don't be involved in philosophical debates. If you have some philosophical problems, tell me. Don't discuss this." And of course, the situation the political situation changed. However, some kind of reservation toward philosophical problems of logic remained. Of course, I mean statistically. It doesn't mean that these mathematicians are not interested in logic in general. No, we can find Dana Scott was here, yes. Solomon Pfefferman is another example. However, I think most specialized mathematical logicians we are mathematicians. In Poland it is very popular. Even in Warsaw, which is a surprise. Also local tradition. For example, in Krakow, logic was practically absent among mathematicians, because leading mathematicians, Stanisław Zaremba, was a student of French mathematicians, and he had to logic similar attitude like Poincaré. Logic is okay, but as an introduction to mathematics, nothing more. So young people, you can maybe reverse this attitude.